Welcome to another episode of our video series of the mechanics of human cognition. Hello, it is genuinely great to be back in conversation with you. How are you approaching this week?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I actually optimized my eating window this morning, so I feel sharp, which is a perfect state to tackle today's topic.
That's excellent preparation because today we are addressing a concept that has exploded in mainstream popularity, intermittent fasting, but you frame it very differently.
I do.
Not as a fad, but as humanity's, well, our default setting. We're talking about fundamentally shifting our relationship with food.
That's absolutely right. The goal here is to move past the trendy label and really establish the authoritative context for you.
Yeah.
This isn't some new complex diet.
Yeah.
It's a discussion about returning to what our biology was optimized for the vast, vast majority of human existence. Constant food access was.
Yeah.
It was impossible.
The anomaly.
Is the anomaly. Long periods without food were simply the norm.
So, if our bodies evolved under that kind of scarcity, then the modern clinical challenges we see everywhere, the chronic diseases, are mostly a result of eliminating that scarcity.
Precisely. If you look at the most frequent health crises in high-income societies, they almost all stem from two things: chronic physiological stress and critically constant overeating.
We're just overloading the system.
We're overloading a system designed for intermittent use.
Yeah.
We are seeing problems that, historically only plagued the very wealthy, the emperors, the aristocracy,
Or people who could afford to eat all the time.
the only ones who could.
So let's give a clear starting point for everyone listening. When we talk about these structured periods of food abstinence, what exact duration are we talking about? What is intermittent fasting in a practical sense?
We're generally looking at a range of, say, 14 to 18 hours of abstinence from anything with calories.
Okay.
And the simplest way to do this is to just incorporate your 8 hours of sleep. You fast while you sleep, then you just add 4 to 8 hours before and after. You're just pushing back your first meal of the day.
So you could have one single substantial meal in the middle of the day and then not eat again for another 16, 18 hours, and your body would be fine.
More than fine. It would
Ah.
be thriving. The human system is incredibly capable. It can function optimally on just one meal a day.
Then why do so many people feel that awful constant hunger every 3 or 4 hours?
That's not a biological need for fuel. That's a direct result of the imbalanced diets they consume. Specifically, diets rich in high glycemic index carbohydrates. They create a really unstable fuel source.
A fuel source that demands constant top-ups.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
Let's get into the physical reality of this. A lot of people worry, if I fast, I'm hurting my stomach. Does not eating increase the risk of ulcers or gastritis? It feels like you're starving the machinery.
That is probably the single most common misconception. And the truth is the complete opposite. Physiologically, fasting is not a mechanism for degradation. It is a profound mechanism for repair.
So what about that stomach rumble, that sound you hear when you're truly hungry, maybe 10, 12 hours in? Is that just the stomach collapsing on itself?
What's so fascinating here is that the rumble is far from passive. That specific sound indicates a highly organized physical activity known in physiology as the Migrating Myoelectric Complex, the MMC.
So it's an intentional process. The body has a literal trigger that requires emptiness to begin.
Exactly. The MMC functions like a specialized maintenance crew. It's a rhythmic, muscular wave, a peristaltic action that sweeps and squeezes everything. Residual contents, debris, old food particles.
All the gunk.
All the gunk, all the way from the esophagus down to the intestines. It's a thorough mechanical cleaning process.
Okay, that's the mechanical cleaning. What about on a sort of a biological repair level?
That's the second critical function, mucosal renewal. The inner lining of your entire digestive channel, the mucosa, is maybe the most important barrier in your body.
It protects everything.
It protects the tissue from strong acids, enzymes, and it regulates what gets absorbed. And this barrier is constantly under assault. Its repair process is only fully triggered after a minimum of 8 hours of fasting.
So every time we snack or eat a meal inside that 8-hour window, we're actually interrupting our body's own cleaning cycle.
You are stopping it cold. You're
Yeah.
constantly feeding. You're constantly forcing the system into digestion mode and preventing this repair. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
you know how the brain cleanses itself during deep sleep?
Right.
The digestive system needs sustained emptiness to do the same thing. For many non-chronic conditions like gastritis or the very beginning of an ulcer, fasting is a remarkably potent therapeutic tool. It just lets the body heal.
That leads us right to water. There's so much confusing advice. You hear everything from drink 10 liters a day to only drink when you're thirsty. What's the reality?
The reality is you need to discard the idea that the human body is a container you just fill up based on a formula.
So no water per pound calculation.
No, your need is fundamentally individualized. It's based on your metabolic rate, your activity, your diet. It's dynamic.
But why are our natural thirst signals so corrupted in modern life? I don't think I ever feel truly thirsty.
That's the key. Modern, sedentary urban life means we rarely exert ourselves enough or sweat enough to trigger those strong electrolyte shifts that the brain is looking for.
The signal gets weak?
The signal from the hypothalamus, which regulates thirst, it becomes dull. So we end up confusing mild mouth dryness or even boredom for actual thirst. We just sip constantly, masking the true signal.
And constantly sipping, even without thirst, that has a risk.
A significant one, yes. Overhydration is a real issue. You put an unnecessary and constant burden on the kidneys. But more critically, you disrupt your electrolyte balance. You risk something called water intoxication.
Can you just break that down for us? What does that mean for our cells?
Think of it this way. Your nerve cells and muscles communicate using tiny electrical signals. And those signals depend on a very precise ratio of salts and water, a concentration gradient. If you flood the system with plain water and dilute those salts, you compromise the ability of your cells to talk to each other. It affects everything.
So just to be crystal clear, for anyone trying intermittent fasting, do I restrict water during the fasting window?
Absolutely not. This is critical. Intermittent fasting is specifically about abstaining from caloric intake. You must continue to drink water and other non-caloric liquids, black coffee, tea, throughout the fast.
Especially on longer fasts.
But especially then. On 3, 5, or 7-day water fasts, hydration is paramount. The only exception really is certain cultural fasts like Ramadan, but that's a completely different physiological discussion.
Okay, let's pivot to the brain. We need to talk about hunger. Everyone knows that feeling of hanger, that immediate, irritable, I need to eat now feeling. Is that true hunger?
Almost never. That intense, panic-driven hunger that hits you 3 or 4 hours after a meal, that's not hunger. That is a sugar crash.
Okay, walk us through the mechanism. How does a sugar crash create that feeling of panic?
Well, if you eat something with a high glycemic index processed starches, a sugary drink, it breaks down incredibly fast. Your blood sugar spikes.
Right.
Your pancreas senses this overload and releases a massive, sometimes excessive, dose of insulin. The insulin does its job, clears the sugar from the blood, but the brain, which just got used to that super high sugar level, registers the rapid drop as a catastrophic fuel shortage.
So it's an overcorrection, a false alarm.
A complete false alarm. The brain panics and demands an immediate sugar replacement.
So when does genuine hunger actually arrive?
Genuine, true hunger, the kind that signals your stomach is physically empty, that typically arrives 7 to 8 hours after a balanced meal. One with healthy fats, protein, and fiber. And that signal initiates something far more interesting than just feeding.
And here's where it gets really fascinating. You've said that the hormones released during this state of true hunger, like ghrelin, they actually initiate repair. What is the body doing when it's truly hungry?
Evolution conditioned us to use long-term hunger as a repair state. When hormones like ghrelin are released, they kick off cellular cleanup processes. The most famous one is autophagy.
Where the body starts recycling old, damaged cell parts.
Exactly. It's house cleaning. These hormones also promote the production of new, healthy cells and enhance immune surveillance, actively fighting off potentially cancerous cells. Hunger, in this evolutionary context, is the body deciding, if we aren't busy digesting, we're going to rebuild.
Which sounds metabolically far superior to constantly running on sugar. This brings us to the big pivot, the shift to using ketone bodies for fuel.
Precisely. Once you sustain a fast and deplete your glucose stores, the body pivots. It starts to break down stored body fat, and this process generates ketone bodies.
And ketones are a better fuel for the brain.
Glucose is fast, volatile energy. Ketones are the brain's second favorite fuel. They provide a long-lasting, steady, durable energy source. Your metabolism becomes dramatically more stable.
So if we're constantly eating carbohydrates, we're actively preventing this more stable system from ever engaging.
Absolutely. Continuous carb intake keeps insulin levels high, and high insulin is a direct signal to the body to stop burning fat and instead store all excess energy.
Usually as visceral fat, the dangerous kind.
The dangerous kind, around your organs and arteries. And we know how powerful ketones are. Historically, ketogenic diets were used clinically to manage severe epileptic seizures in children
Why?
because it demonstrated that the brain operates with remarkably greater discipline and stability when it's fueled by this steady source of energy.
Let's talk about the behavioral side of this. Hanger. We know it's a sugar crash, but why does it turn us into irrational, angry people?
It's pure energy rationing. The brain is only 2% of your body mass, but it consumes a massive 20 to 25% of your energy.
Wow.
So when its fuel supply fluctuates wildly, it can't sustain its highest level functions, specifically the prefrontal cortex.
The CEO of the brain. The part that handles logic and impulse control.
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for patience, anger management, complex decision-making. When blood sugar plummets, the system immediately cuts power to that expensive area.
And you revert to a more primitive state.
You revert to your survival-oriented mode,
Yeah.
prioritizing immediate gratification and defense. That's where the irritability and impatience come from.
This connects directly to food dependency. If someone feels they absolutely must have bread or a dessert to feel satisfied, is that a real nutritional need?
No, that is a dependency syndrome. Processed food, especially, is often treated by the body as an addiction.
How so?
Well, things high in sugar, fat, and flavor enhancers like MSG are meticulously engineered to hijack the body's reward system, a system that evolved to make us chase scarce, high-energy resources.
Like finding a rare patch of ripe fruit or a successful hunt.
Precisely. Today, those things are abundant and cheap. A dessert isn't a food you need. It's a pure pleasure object that triggers the same reward circuitry as, say, alcohol or other addictive substances.
So for a listener who recognizes that dependency in themselves, what's a realistic timeline for breaking that cycle?
The good news is that adaptation is very achievable with discipline. Breaking a severe sugar dependency typically takes about 10 to 15 days of strict controlled eating.
That's it.
That's it. Once the body fully adapts to that stable, fat-fueled state of ketosis, the entire chemical preference system shifts. High-sugar foods genuinely lose their appeal.
That is incredibly encouraging. Now, let's touch on individual needs, especially the discussion around gender differences in fasting.
It is crucial to acknowledge the rhythmic complexity of female physiology. While individual variation is huge, the monthly cycle inherently affects metabolism and energy demand. The system just demands greater sensitivity.
So a rigid 18-hour fast every single day might be counterproductive at certain times of the month for women.
Yes. For optimal function, the timing has to be modulated. The key advice is to avoid starting or maintaining intense fasting during the high protection phases, particularly the progesterone phase, just before menstruation.
Why then?
That's when the body requires maximum stability and energy investment. It's preparing for a potential pregnancy, whether that's the intent or not. Stressing the system then can disrupt hormonal balance.
So when is fasting generally better suited for women?
It's usually better suited for the estrogen phase, the follicular phase after menstruation. That's a time of rebuilding and renewal. The body is naturally geared towards efficiency then. The energy demands are different.
And contrast that with the male system.
The male system, lacking that complex monthly rhythm, often operates on what you could call a Groundhog Day physiology.
Chuckles. Yeah.
Energy needs and hormones are relatively constant day to day. So men can typically maintain a steady fasting schedule, a 16.8 or 18.6, with less need for constant internal modulation.
We hear the term biohack for everything these days. Is fasting really a biohack?
The term biohack implies forcing the system to perform in a new, modern way. I would argue the most effective biohack is the exact opposite. It's aligning our behavior, our fasting, our sleep, our nutrition, with our evolutionarily optimized factory settings. True health is achieved by honoring the body's original design, not fighting it.
A powerful distinction. So to bring this all together, let's revisit two bits of conventional wisdom. First, is it true that eating diverts blood flow from the brain, reducing cognitive performance?
Absolutely. After a large meal, the body prioritizes digestion, shifting significant blood volume downward. That temporarily reduces cerebral blood flow, leading to that familiar post-meal brain fog.
And second, does your stomach actually shrink? If you stop overeating, does it physically get smaller?
It will, and rapidly. The stomach is a highly muscular reactive organ. If you constantly stretch it, it expands. But if you maintain a disciplined intake, its muscle tone will naturally return it toward its original fist-sized dimensions. It's a testament to the body's self-correcting mechanisms.
And this incredible self-correcting capacity brings us to our final thought for you to carry forward, a reflection on the engineering of the human body.
The body you inhabit is the result of millions of years of intricate research and development. It has fine-tuned every single mechanism we've discussed. So any mechanical intervention like gastric bypass surgery should be viewed as, well, as attacking this finely tuned system with a bulldozer.
So even if it's aimed at forcing weight loss.
While sometimes necessary in extreme, life-threatening cases, unnecessary surgical intervention carries heavy, often hidden costs. It destabilizes the entire metabolic ecosystem that nature spent millennia perfecting. The priority must always be to work with the body's design first.
Before resorting to mechanical alteration.
Exactly. It's imperative that you value and preserve the incredible subtle engineering that your body represents.
A profound point on which to conclude. Thank you for walking us through the elegance of our own biology today.